another MP. James Wilde is the Member of Parliament for North.
That's correct, yeah.
Northwest. James, you're backing Tom Tugendhat. He's in last place at the moment on the MP ballots. Why are you backing someone in last place?
I think Tom's got the character and the values that we need to rebuild the trust with the British people, with those people who switched to reform. He's got momentum coming into the conference. He added votes in the last stage of the MP votes. We've seen at this conference the reception he had from members when he did his presentation and question and answer session yesterday, setting out a positive vision for Conservatism that will help us win back the voters that we need to, so we can kick out this awful Labour government.
It's interesting to hear Tom's position on policy. He started off this race being pretty strident on the issue of the European Court of Human Rights. He's, to some extent, rode back from that initial position, or is that an unfair characterisation?
I think that is a bit unfair. I've worked with Tom on this issue for over a decade when we both worked in the Ministry of Defence and after he left, and his position is very clear. Opt out of those parts that don't work for us, which is firstly doable under the existing framework. Reform the bits that aren't working for us, and other countries are experiencing similar problems. But if we can't get the reforms, be prepared to walk away from that treaty. We don't want to get that to that point first off. We want to reform the treaty, but he's been very clear he's prepared to do so if necessary.
Robert Jenrick today has been speaking about those who want to reform the ECHR as if they're the sort of people who as if it's David Cameron's EU negotiation strategy, the sort of failed attempt at renegotiating something, about reforming something that has a membership of 46 countries that would need unanimity to agree to any change. Is it really possible to reform it?
Well, it's not easy to reform these international treaties, but we're seeing other countries, Germany, where they're looking at issues with deporting terrorists. We all want the same objective. It's how do we get there? Do we try and reform it first? Obviously, the ECHR is written into the Good Friday Agreement. There are complications that we need to work through before you got to that point. I think simply saying you would just leave on day one isn't really going to be a sensible policy to pursue.
Now, Nigel Farage is a figure who looms large over this conference. There were 98 seats where the Reform Party came second. Many of your former colleagues would still be on those green benches, arguably, if the votes that went to Reform had gone to the Conservatives instead. What's the Tom Tugendhat strategy for winning those voters back?
We've got to win back the trust of those people. They voted against us in many ways. They wanted to get rid of the Conservatives because we'd failed to deliver on what we said we'd do, bringing down legal migration, dealing with illegal migration. So by acting on the issues they are concerned about, he's proposing putting in place a legal cap, for example, on migration of 100,000 people a year and training more British people into those jobs to move into the NHS. It's by delivering on what we say we'll do, and that's what Tom's record is. He voted against national insurance rises, he voted against vaccine passports. He sticks to his principles and he acts when he says he will, and that's what people want to see from politicians. And we've moved away from that, and that's why we lost lots of good colleagues. And we need Tom in position so we can win back those seats and win the next election.
It does seem that one of the other candidates in this race, Kemi Badenoch, has been talking about a cap today, although that seems to be a shift in policy perhaps from an earlier position. Do you think that all the candidates are now converging on this idea of a 100,000 cap? Is this a point of unanimity now?
Well, potentially. I mean, Tom came out with this early. He recognises that immigration was one of the issues that people voted against us for. Similarly, on the NHS, people didn't think that we were dealing with the backlog in waiting lists and we'd failed to deliver the reform that's necessary into that service. So on both of those issues, people switched away from us. And I hope there is consensus. We do need to bring immigration down considerably, and we need to invest in training into British people to move into the jobs in the public sector and the private sector.
OK, James Wilde, thank you so much for joining us here live on the GB News.